Okay, well, Radiance, thank you so much for being with us today. You are
Yes.
here to talk about a very important Burning Man topic that comes up at every single burn, and that is consent.
Yes.
So we have virgins coming to the burn. What does a virgin need to know about consent?
Okay, well, lots of things. I think the whole world needs to learn some things, but a lot of specific things for burns. So, one is that consent is the 11th principle. Some folks have said consent is really the principle that ties all the rest of them together. Actually, none of the rest of the principles really can operate if we're not operating from a place of valuing consent, which means valuing another person's autonomy of their body, their mind, their heart, their space. So we have a lot of sort of mores in burn world that may or may not be present in the default world. For example, it is very common, or should be really every time, unless you have an established relationship with somebody, if you're going to like meet them for the first time, to ask, may I hug you? Versus just going up and hugging somebody, for example, which I practice in the default world. And the more I feel people burn, they get into that habit, but not always the case outside of there. So very important to know, especially in COVID times. Not everybody wants to be touched. Some people have sensory issues that cause them to not enjoy touch, or they just don't trust strangers, or they don't like to be hugged, trauma. So that's one really important thing to know, that when you're encountering a new person at a burn, and even if it's an old person, there's something that we call like a consent framework, which is something you can build with somebody where I might tell you, hey, like, we've been friends for 5 years. You don't have to ask me anymore. You can just come up and hug me. I'm totally cool with that. And that can go for any types of things. Like you can, and it's always renegotiable too. So I might tell you, like, until I say otherwise, you have my blanket consent to come up and bear hug me, grab me, surprise me with it. I don't care. That's fine. And maybe one day I'll say, right now, actually, I'd prefer you don't, or that you ask me, because I'm not in a space where I enjoy that. And again, I use hugging, but that could apply to all kinds of things, any small to large, sexual to non-sexual. And that's one big point that we make in our consent trainings that we do, is that consent, a lot of people think about it in relation to sex and sexuality, and that's extremely important. But it is actually the foundation of everything, and you should be valuing folks' consent in every interaction you have. It's the basis of relationship with another human, recognizing that they have separate autonomous needs, desires, boundaries, and that you're no mind reader, that to learn those boundaries, you must ask and have conversation, which is another thing we talk about a lot, moving from guessing culture to asking culture. So rather, and I talk about this a lot in romance, like a lot of movies, it's like you're supposed to like somehow feel the vibe that they want you to kiss them, and it's like the stars align and you go for it and you just know. And that's beautiful when that happens, and sometimes you guess right, but oftentimes you don't. And if you're guessing, and even if you feel that, there's no harm in being like, am I right to think that you want me to kiss you right now? And then, hopefully you're right, and they say, yes, please, and you go for it. But there's a lot of assumptions that are made. And when you're dealing with folks who are neurodivergent, of which we have a huge population in the world, and especially burn world, who may just be riding a very different wavelength, or people on substances, intoxicated in various ways, it is very difficult to know for sure that you are guessing correctly. And there's no need, when you could just ask. And that, again, could go for non-sexual things, anything, Is it okay that I'm sitting here in this cuddle puddle next to you? Like, are you cool with that? Like, platonically, is it cool if I'm sitting there? Am I too close to you? Is it okay if that I'm sharing like a story of my personal life with you that may be traumatic or triggering? That's one big one I talk about, like not trauma dumping, like checking in, like, do you consent to me telling you something a little heavy right now, or something about grief I'm carrying? So, having conversations about interacting with people is, again, like physical, mental, emotional space. So important everywhere. In the burn worlds is a world where we're really trying, those of us really fighting for this, really trying to make the culture, and then it can spread out into the default world as well.
That's
A lot
great.
of information.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you so much. So, one of the things that a virgin might experience at a burn that they've never experienced anywhere is a cuddle puddle. And you run one of the best cuddle puddles that I've ever seen. So, can you talk a little bit about consent etiquette in a cuddle puddle?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I run a camp called Not Your Average Cuddles. Funny enough, we made the name and we didn't mean to have a cuddle puddle, and people showed up for cuddles, which I was pretty new to burning, so like didn't even have the awareness, and it kind of grew naturally. And so I've learned a lot in the years that I've been running the camp, and it's become very large. Um, our cuddle puddle is actually like a explicitly non-sexual space, which is one thing to know that and I would, I would wish that more cuddle puddles would make it very clear, like if it is a space that could turn sexual or like orgiastic, or if it is purely platonic. We've made it very intentional because we hold the belief that a person to consent to sex needs to be sober enough to get up out of our cuddle puddle and go to a second location. But not all of them are like that, but all of them should and do follow general rules that nobody should be entering the cuddle puddle. So basically we have like inflatable couches, and, it might start with me and a friend sitting in there and cuddling or not. And then people come and we can either invite them in and be like, hey, would you like to come and cuddle with us? Or maybe a person comes up and is like, may I come in and cuddle with you? And that is key, is that you should not be entering a cuddle puddle and making any physical contact with another person without asking, and asking multiple steps along the way, like, may I cuddle with you? Then when you get a yes, like, okay, is it okay if I come on, put my head here, or can I put my head on your leg? And also being very aware of your hands. And like sometimes there's like 19 of us and I'll have to give a blanket like everybody. I have no idea who I'm touching and I don't know where my hands are. So please let me know if I'm anywhere I shouldn't be, and move my hands, because I can't see, or I can't tell what I'm on. And statements like that, and checking in too, even just for comfort, like, are my hips stabbing you? Like, is everyone comfortable? Like, do we need to adjust? And having periodic check-ins. And we have an our cuddle puddle, which I would recommend for a lot of cuddle puddles, like, especially if you have a lot of people around, you might be down with making out with the person you're next to or your partner right there, but you have like 18 other people that are physically like there with you, and you're in their space. And so we try to really minimize sexual energy in ours, because it's very difficult to make sure that everybody's consenting to your partnering off and making out or whatever. And again, different cuddle puddles might have different energies around that. And a one where it is encouraging sexual energy might be fun in a different way, in a different time. But it's nice to be clear about what's happening, so that people that maybe are just wanting a platonic energy and are like triggered by sexual energy, be aware that like the energy you're bringing to a space, this could go for anything at a burn, may impact other people. And to just check in and be like, is this cool? Is everyone cool? Like, I know some people, like I've seen people with penises, like check in, like, I am naked. Like, is it okay if I'm naked in the cuddle puddle? Like, is that going to be okay? And again, moving away from guessing, and just like, when in doubt, just ask. And like, it might feel scary to ask, but better to know. And people are generally pretty like glad that you've asked and checked in. And a lot of times it's like an enthusiastic yes, like, please come in. Yeah, absolutely. Like, come in. Yeah, so that's kind of how the cuddle puddle operates.
Cool. Thank you. So what about, like, let's talk about sexual touch first, right? Because that's probably what comes up with most people when they think about consent is, do I have consent to have sex with this person? And one of the things that I've found at the burn that you have to be really conscious of is intoxication. So tell me about sexual touch and how to handle intoxication.
Absolutely. So, first of all, with sexual touch, one thing I hear because we do at camp many couple talks, one just a general talk by Lord Henry, who I think is being interviewed separately, and also I do one called Making Consent Talk Sexy, because what I hear a lot of times is people are like, I want to practice consent, but it ruins the mood to like ask these questions. And I am like, I'm a lesbian. I have like had many a sexual experience, and trust me, like, it is actually very sexy. And like, women and people of all genders, like, at least in my experience, like, find it arousing and attractive, that somebody is concerned for their desires, their wants, their boundaries, and asking about it. There is many ways. You have to learn a little game, and that's where we do our talk, so we can teach each other, the game of how to, because if you're like, oh my God, is this okay? Like, is this okay? Is this okay? Is this okay? Like, if you feel nervous and scared about it, then that's not as sexy. But if you're just like confident that this is like an appropriate thing to ask and like a positive thing, like, hey, like, is this cool? Like, you want this, you want that. So we talk a lot about that. Again, like, not just assuming that we should know how to please someone, what somebody likes, like, pressure, speed, like all the things that come with sex. So that little spiel I'll give. As for intoxication, we talk a lot in our trainings about capacity and things that can lower a person's capacity to consent. And intoxication would be one. And it's not a blanket, like, it's not like you could do a breathalyzer for alcohol and know, like, okay, you're at the place where you can't consent. Because for someone who's an alcoholic that drinks every day, maybe they could have 5 beers and they still have a lot of capacity for thought and consenting, where someone else never drinks, has one drink and is like wasted. So it's not about the quantity in comparison to anybody else, but it is often pretty obvious when a person is beyond their capacity to consent. Like, if the person is clearly not acting in the way they would sober, they're not making other decisions the way they would sober, if they're stumbling, if they're unconscious, or like in a K-hole, or like really tripping hard, there's signs that you can look out for. And if you don't know the person and you have any doubts, another situation that you probably should not take a chance. Like, especially I've learned this, like, in Burns, is all kinds of chances for sex. And I used to think like, I should do this and take this chance, but I've learned there's no rush. Like, if I'm going to have sexual chemistry with somebody, investing the time to make sure I know what is baseline for them, so I can tell if like this person is actually not at their baseline at all and not in their right mind. Getting to know them, having conversations about safe sex, condoms, STIs, fluid bonding, poly versus monogamy status, all these things, like slow pumping the brakes, getting to know some of the answers to those questions before jumping into a sexual experience in Burns will save you so much heartbreak. Take it from me. I wish, as a virgin, I knew that. I would have saved a lot of drama, a lot of trouble for myself and others. And I've seen it really like cause a lot of trouble when people just like are so excited and rush into something sexual. So, and intoxication's one big one. And it can go both ways, where you think you guys are evenly intoxicated, and then after the fact someone's like, I actually like was not, like, I was too high, drunk, whatever, to say yes to that. And I myself might have been like, well, I probably wouldn't have done this either if I hadn't been intoxicated, even if one person doesn't see it as like a violation. But once you add it into the mix, that's where it's really good to have an established connection and relationship with somebody, even communication before you're intoxicated, to be like, hey, we're both doing this substance tonight. If it gets sexual, like, do you have any qualms about that? And talk about it beforehand, so that you both have your sort of consent framework, where you're like, obviously it could be revoked, but you're like, no, we've talked about this. We have an idea and a plan, or like, here's the signs. If I start like, looking really sleepy, like I'm too drunk, please don't touch me at that point, or whatever. And so a lot of that is that communication before having any sexual connection, and being very aware, and definitely not using the intoxication to ply someone into sexual experiences, which unfortunately we see is some of the issues that come up at Burns, is people really using that to get people to be more willing to have sex with them. And that is not cool at all.
Yeah, coercion is a no. One of the things that I've noticed at Burns is that, people are in this heightened state, and we meet them in this heightened state. They're around their community. They might be on substances. There's a lot of things that can be going on. And so you're meeting this person not in their default world state. And so you have this elevated experience with them. You might think you're falling in love. It might be magical. And then come time after the burn, people are getting ghosted. They're totally different people when they get home. So just like, I agree with you 100%, like taking the time to to slow down and like get to know someone, especially if like you're looking for long-term partnership. I know a lot of people who have, they're like no festy sex for that reason, because it's like, if we want to have sex, we can do it after the burn, but let's take this burn to kind of get to know each other first. So thank you for pointing that out. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that someone might say no that might not be obvious?
Yeah. So obviously, like, well, maybe not obvious to some is body language. Like, and I think that's where, especially when neurodivergence comes in, sometimes people totally, which is an important part that this brings up, that there is some responsibility on the side of, we often think about people violating consent and the responsibilities they have to respecting consent. Obviously valid, important. We also, on the other side, have a responsibility to be clear in our boundaries as much as we can. And obviously, sometimes if we're feeling scared or uncomfortable, like, you know, maybe aren't as clear, and that's okay. It's not like you've done something wrong, but the more someone could be clear, because, you know, a lot of people have neurodivergence, and you might think like, he keeps coming onto me and I'm like physically coming in my space and I'm turning away from him. Like, why doesn't he get it? Not everybody picks up on the nonverbal cues, but, you know, something we can be aware of, like if every time you move closer to somebody, they move away, that is a sign they don't want you that close to them. And maybe you should check in, like, hey, I noticed like you're pulling away, like, am I making you uncomfortable? And, you know, if you feel safe, like if you're on the other side, you know, not a bad idea to say, hey, like, you know, you seem nice, but like, I don't really like people in my physical space, and like, I'm feeling a little bit smothered, like, could you move back? And articulating that. You know, and again, like, not necessarily going in for a kiss with somebody that you don't really know or know their signals, because it takes a while to learn someone's signals. And once you build a relationship and you can kind of have more of that nonverbal communication, because you've gotten to know them, you've had talks that it's like, yeah, you can just kiss me, I love it, you're my partner, like, come up and just like kiss me like anytime, I love it. But until you have learned somebody, you know, if you can't, like, not assuming that you do know, even if you think you know their signals, again, like checking in and being like, you know, I'm reading a vibe, like, that you're into me, am I right about this? And it's terrifying, and it requires a certain level of confidence to be so direct, but you have to, it's the only way to really be clear about those signals.
What does an enthusiastic yes mean?
So you know, people could be on many levels of being a yes or no to something. And there's some, you know, there's like the space where you're like a hell no, which is like, hell no, I do not want you to kiss me, I will punch you if you come close to me to try to kiss me. Moving to like a no, I don't think so, to like sort of like ambivalence in the middle, where it's like, I don't know, I haven't figured out how I feel about this person, if I like him or not. And then there's kind of like, I think that would be okay. And then you move up and like more yes, until you're at a like hell yes, where I'm like, oh my God, I've been dying for you to kiss me. Like, I am sitting here praying you'll kiss me. And that is the level of yes that we aim for. And especially a lot of people settle, and especially people that are pushy and trying to coerce, when the person's like, they're not saying no, so I'm going to keep doing this because they're not telling me to stop. So I guess it's a yes. And that's no yes. That's a maybe, and a maybe is not good enough for consent, and especially in our culture. So a hell yes is when the person's there's no room for doubt in that or regret later. It's like both parties have arrived at like, yes, like, I am so excited, I'm enthusiastic, I want this just as much as you want this, and I'm not being pushed into it. We are excitedly meeting in the middle on this. And that's really what we aim for with all things, again, like hugs, like conversation, connection, sex, all of it.
Another area that we've seen consent violations is in platonic relationships. So can you talk more about how could you violate someone's consent if it's a non-sexual situation? What have you seen, like maybe some examples of consent violations that we've seen in the community?
Interesting. One big one that's come up is people like not respecting someone who has been violated by somebody else, and kind of standing up or diminishing that person's experience. which I don't know, some people may or may not call it consent violation, but it's definitely like gets in the realm of consent issues that I encounter frequently when someone has had a violation and maybe publicly talked about it, or they've like told this person and the person's like, no. I've had that happen to me. Someone said, well, I mean, it kind of sounds like you were like asking for that, or like that you like led this person on. And I was like, I was asleep in the case I'm talking about, and I'm like, there's no like, it doesn't matter. Like it was very hurtful to have somebody stand up for somebody that had harmed me, even if they don't believe me, or it doesn't matter. Like, to me, that was the impact and that was my truth. So that's one thing to be conscious of if someone's talking about consent stuff with you, like taking your own personal feelings about it, taking your feelings out about the person who's caused harm. Which I'll stop here too to mention that we at Nachos use the language like someone who has caused harm and someone who has been harmed, to take out words like perpetrator, or like, you know, I don't know, more in like victim. It's like someone has been harmed and they're, you know, saying I feel harmed, and the other person has, you know, been alleged to cause that harm. And so a lot of the reaction from everyone involved is, you know, again, looking at the impact of like, it's figuring out the truth of what happened, and the he said, she said, she said, she said, they said, whatever, doesn't matter so much as realizing like this person is experiencing the feeling of being harmed, and the other person has the opportunity perhaps to like make it up to them, to like repair that, or, you know, different outcomes that might come there. But so that's one thing. Another thing with platonic relationships, I see a lot and been thinking about a lot lately, is people trauma dumping, or like bringing up triggering things. I have PTSD from some of the things I've been through, and like really struggle with panic attacks and triggers. And people will just message me really intense things about consent violations without checking in with me, and then I am like wrecked and sobbing and panicking it for like days, and I don't think they have any idea, especially in text. They're just shooting off a message and I'm wrecked for days. And that can happen in a lot of different ways to different people, that like, you know, consenting to talking about someone's ex, or bringing up something triggering, or just time. Like, does a person have time to field like 5-paragraph messages from you, you know, on Messenger when they have a full-time job and kids or something? Like, so checking in before trauma dumping, checking in about your communication, to be like, do you have space to hold this for me? Do you have space to hear something hard, heavy, all that? Those are probably two of the biggest things that I see coming up.
Yeah, I know a friend and I, we had a consent violation and we handled it so beautifully, but basically it was a platonic relationship. We agreed that we were all going to cuddle in a platonic way, but then he started like petting my shoulder. And it was so subtle, right? Like, I had consented to cuddling, but I hadn't consented to caressing. And so I think that's a really good example of something that you might not think that you're violating someone's consent, but like you have to ask every single step of the way.
100%. 100%. Yeah, I would see that a lot.
So sorry, go ahead.
And just unfortunately, some people like taking advantage of the vulnerability of a consensual platonic space and trying to use that to like get more. And like we have actually at our camp, we've instituted like cuddle fairies that hang out, have shifts to like hang out in our space, just to remind people, because some people don't know, they're new to it, and they like genuinely like just misread. They thought it was more orgiastic or like a kink space, and they didn't understand the vibe, or they're not as good at maybe they're used to a different vibe in a different community or something. And so we try to be gentle with people and educating that, like, especially if it's a minor thing, like, hey, like, you know, this is kind of the culture we're setting. And so, you know, please respect that. But being aware that some people really are, in my opinion, like truly like a little bit predators about it, and like will use that, and being very vigilant and standing as a community to keep an eye out of people who are pushing and constantly trying to go past the boundaries, and having strong, firm boundaries around that. And for yourself too, not being afraid to be like, hey, like I told you this is not okay, and like please stop. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So last question, what should someone do if they have a consent violation at a burn?
Great question. So, you know, some people camp in open camping. Some people are with their own camp. Can depend a little bit on where it happens. for example, at Nachos, we have a consent committee, sort of shifting some of that. And like, I'm trying to shift off having the entire community come to me with their consent violations that happen everywhere. But we've been really successful in navigating and mediating consent issues that come up in our space, and some that were not in our space. But again, everybody's been coming to me. But so if it happens like at a camp, you could try to find somebody from the camp to let them know, especially if the person continues to be in that space, so that they can address it or maybe talk to the person. You can go to Rangers would be a great thing. And actually, I would highly recommend, and I've been working with the different boards of the different Mid-Atlantic burns to figure out consent processes that'll work better. And they all encourage that we should like as much as possible tell Rangers, so that there is a written record of the issue, especially if it's something, on the more severe side, less than just like they hugged me and I didn't really want them to, that could be bad. But that might, some things are maybe a little more minor where you could just work it out with the person, like, hey, I know you're new to burning and you came up and hugged me, but actually here we ask, and like that's the vibe, and the person might be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, and like then you navigate it. You don't need to necessarily bring a ranger into that. But if there's especially any sexual issues or something where you think this person may be a harm to somebody else or continue the behavior, or making creepy like comments like catcalling or like being gropey with people, I highly recommend telling a ranger or someone on shift. Like you could go to Sanctuary and tell them, and then anything reported to Sanctuary or Rangers will be like formally logged, and then that gets to like the people who run the event, so they can keep record of it. After the event, or I guess you could do it in the event if you had internet, they have a form at every burn to report incidents. They are quite limited in what they are able to do with that information, extremely limited. I would have very cautious expectations of what will come of that, but it is an avenue that is important to further document it. Finding community, someone you trust, if you have a friend that you're with, someone from your own camp to talk to. Sometimes even little things, I've seen this so many times where people were like, in the moment, it didn't seem that bad, and I navigated it and it was fine. But then it really stuck with me, and now it's like a week later, and I'm like in a really bad trauma place, and now processing it. So even if you think maybe you don't need support, it never hurts to get a little support or tell somebody that can be there if it turns into a bigger thing emotionally for you. And I always say, and I wish that more of the community would do this, that like a big part of what we do at camp when someone has a harm that they're reporting to me, I can't always do anything about the other person. Like oftentimes I can for my camp, but sometimes I'm limited in what I can do for the person who caused harm. But I can surely hold space for the person who came to me and recognize that like especially sexual trauma is deeply disturbing to people and upsetting to many people, and also pervasive in default world. And so there's a lot of trauma many of us bring to the burn world about sexual trauma. And so if someone comes to me with a consent violation, I'm like, how can I be there for you? Like, or if I can't, like, can I connect you with somebody who has the spoons to hold space for you? So I really would recommend, if anyone has a friend going through it or something, to realize a lot of times people just need like space held. Like you might not be able to figure it out, but be like, I'm here for you. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I know that, in terms of the committees at the burn, I know the one thing they can do is they can ban someone from a burn. So especially if we're seeing pervasive predatory behavior, there is recourse. Obviously, if you experience something like rape and sexual assault, this is a time to get the authorities involved. This is not something for the Burning Man community to handle for you. It's really important that you kind of follow the processes, because the Burning Man community, as you said, has very limited resources to be able to handle these things. And so it's more about bringing this protection into the community and making people aware.
Yeah, and unfortunately, even with banning, I've been learning that it is very rare that they are able to or willing to do that. So not relying on that, but hoping that they will, especially in more severe things. I've lost my faith a little bit in the ability for them to ban anyone, but it does happen, and especially in like really severe and serial issues where someone's doing this to multiple people. But they're put in a little bit of a legal hard place because people will sue for libel and say, like, and it's happened in our communities. So burns are in a tough spot that legally they can only do so much. And even just investigating it sometimes can put them in a really tough spot. And so it's where I work. I have a coalition too across the Mid-Atlantic region. I'm always looking for people to get involved, to join together, people that are committed to this, to take some of the pressure off the boards so that there's other, like many of us working on this and committed to changing the culture, maintaining the culture, changing from default world rape culture anyways, and like there's so little consent culture out in the default world. So I think we're leagues above what you see at like any bar in America. Like it's way better, but also like we could still go further, and working together to do that and being vocal. Signs, I found signs are so useful. We at my camp have like 1 million signs. I literally have one that says, if you violate consent, Radiance will hex you, and I will, and I have. I'm not messing around. It's like, it's very clear. And a statement here too about some people feel that banning or something goes against radical inclusion, and I very much disagree. I've been thinking lately about the principles rather than each one being able to operate independently, but I saw them in a vision on like sacred geometry, like a flower of life symbol. They're all in balance. If you are radically inclusive but you don't care about someone's consent, it doesn't work. Our community doesn't work. If we're radically self-reliant but we're not having the civic responsibility to build something communally, it doesn't work. Everything must work in a perfect balance for our community to be what it's supposed to be. And so everyone has the opportunity to be included in our community and is welcomed with open arms, but we have boundaries, loving boundaries, hopefully set with the intention of community good. And so, if someone violates those boundaries that we have, and like, for example, violate someone's consent, like expelling them is not excluding them. It's not radically exclusive. It is everyone had the chance to be included. We all come with it, and we just have to follow very simple, basic. We don't ask a lot of our community. You can be naked. You can like walk around with butt plugs hanging out. Like you can do whatever you want pretty much. And like, we're cool with it, but we just have a couple things we must do, and consent. Respecting consent is absolutely one, and I firmly believe someone is not prepared to be in our community if they cannot follow that basic tenet. So,
well, thank you so much. This is a wealth of information. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to our virgins before they come to their first burn?
One thing that I've learned, no one believes this about me, but I am by nature an extremely shy, socially anxious person. And now I run this whole huge camp, and they like joke that I'm a cult leader, a cult, CULT, Community United Around Lesbian Teachings, actually. But one thing I learned is that I feel very shy, like in default world, like feeling like safe to walk into a space, especially if you have any oppressed identities. I'm queer, like I've mentioned, like I feel unsafe by default because I am in default world a lot of times. But I learned that if you're a host and you have something to offer, you can't be rejected. So if I walk up to someone and say, hey, would you like to come in the cuddle puddle with me? I'm offering something. They could say no, thank you, but I can't be excluded from that. I'm creating a welcoming space. So when in doubt, if you're not sure how to engage, realize other people are probably just as socially anxious, and open the door for somebody else, even if you're a virgin. Like one easy way is that find someone else who looks like they don't know what to do, and walk up to them and be like, hey, would you like to walk around with me? Or like, do you want to go check out this art with me? And 99.9% of the times at a burn, someone will be like, oh my gosh, yes, thank you. And that's a great hack for like, if you're feeling shy or at a place, realize you can make the place for you and include somebody else, and you'll instantly make friends, I promise. And come by nachos, because we love new people and love consent and love burn. So we're a community for all, our spaces for everybody. So please come by and hang with us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Radiance. This has been amazing.
Yeah, awesome.
Not your average cuddles and have a good time. And now you know all the boundaries and rules around consent that we hold as a community, which I do appreciate. And I know this is a much higher standard than we hold in the default world. So I want to make sure you come to a burn, you have a successful experience, and you kind of understand how our community operates. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, great. Have a great day.
All right, you too.